All right, guys. Disclaimer on this video. This video is not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we're just tossing out. I kind of wanted to react to it since we're doing infographics. This one, Matt, is really interesting. It's the most disgusting punishments in the history of mankind.
All right. I don't know if that means just corporal punishment, torture, or execution.
Well, it is YouTube friendly.
Okay.
Because it is on YouTube, so there's not going to be anything too graphic from the infographics.
Right, just a warning for people who might not want to delve into that kind of content.
Correct. For those of you tuning in for nukes, this is not nukes. This is not even nuke friendly, I don't think. Might not be nuke friendly. There might be some nuke friendly punishments in here, I don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the new content. Make sure to give Matt Spell a little tickle over there.
Or just in the comments section, say, great job, guys. That works just as well.
In the comments, say, I want to tickle Matt Spell.
Don't say that.
At least we'll know you've made it through the first 2 minutes of the introduction. So, let's jump in. Let's see what these disgusting punishments are. Are you ready, Matt?
Yeah, I'm curious if I know any of them.
All right. Link to infographics will be in the description. Link to our socials will be in the description. Let's get disgusted. Ooh.
The summer sun beats down on the back of the prisoner as he's dragged toward the lake. Wrists and ankles locked in heavy chains. He falls flat on his face as the guards drag him toward the water. Persia, 5th century BC. The water laps gently at the banks of the lake, peaceful and serene. There, rocking slightly with each passing wave, is a boat. The prisoner looks nervously at the guards on either side. Before he can utter his last plea for mercy, they've unshackled his arms and are forcing him to lie down in the boat. He's bound in place, the ropes cutting into his flesh. There are 4 small holes in the side of the boat, one for each hand and foot to dangle out, just touching the water's surface. Panic sets in, and the prisoner begs and screams. They cannot do this to him. It's evil. It's too late. The guards lift the heavy bottle that they've been carrying and force his mouth wide open. Down his throat pours the sweetest, most delicious drink he's ever tasted, fresh milk and honey. Against his better judgment, he swallows a mouthful, then another. They've been starving him for days. The drink is the most beautiful thing to ever pass his lips. Only they're pouring too much in. It's flooding out over his cheeks and running into his hair, making his face wet and sticky. He tries to turn his face away, but they grab him and hold him still, mouth open, milk and honey flooding his throat faster than he can drink it. He gulps it down, trying his best not to suffocate. More and more and more. He feels sick, but they won't stop. More and more and more and more. He starts gagging and convulsing, on the verge of vomiting it all back up, and just when he thinks he's about to burst, the men stop. He looks down at his belly and it's bulging from the thick, sweet liquid in his stomach. The prisoner groans and tips his head back, trying not to throw up. Something hits his exposed chest. The guards are now pouring the milk and honey all over him. They're slathering it all over his skin, rubbing it into his chest and his arms, legs, taking extra care to make sure that his hands and feet dangling out of the boat are covered. Then, without any more ceremony,
it gets to the punishment.
Okay.
It's almost peaceful drifting out onto the lake. But the summer sun bakes his skin, caking the milk and honey to it and making him unbelievably uncomfortable. He tries to move, to get into a better position, but his limbs are bound too tightly. He strains against the restraints, but that was a big mistake. The exertion was enough to unsettle his stomach. The man vomits all over himself, stomach acid and bile mixing with the festering milk and honey. A fly lands on top of the mess on his chest, followed by another, followed by a wasp. Something tickles his finger and the man recoils. What was that in the water? It felt big. He closes his eyes, trying to escape the roasting sun, but it burns through his eyelids. When he opens his eyes again, they stick together from the milk and honey. There, standing at the foot of the boat, is a rat. It curiously eyes him, sniffing at the delicious liquid across his skin. It takes a lick, then a bite. The man yells and tries to kick it away, but it's no use, he can't move. Another rat appears, and then a third. Wasps now land on his face, crawling around his nostrils and peering into his eyeballs. The man screams. He screams and screams all through the day until his lungs give out and exhaustion overtakes him. When he wakes, he finds that he's lying in his own filth. The liquid fed to him has started to leak out of his body as diarrhea. The smell is unbearable to him and irresistible to every insect and rodent within a couple of miles. The boat is full of them. The next day, the boat is pulled ashore. Above the man stand his 2 guards. He apologizes for everything and begs for forgiveness, but before he can say more than a few words, the bottle reappears, and the milk and honey flood his mouth and inflate his stomach. The worst part is that they left it out the previous night, so the milk is rancid. Once he's pumped full and lathered up again, they push him out for another day on the water. Days crawl by, turning into weeks, yet the man is still alive. The milk and honey are just enough to keep his body alive for now. The rats have chewed holes in almost every pore of his skin. Maggots crawl about in his rotting flesh, slowly eating their way through him. It's become hard to tell where the man's body ends and where the foul soup accumulating at the bottom of the boat begins. Every kind of infection and disease flows through his blood as his liver does its best to fight a losing battle. But the worst part is only just beginning. The diarrhea that fills the boat is teeming with life. Insects swarm around it as rats wade through it, until one rat in particular has an idea. All of this feces has come from somewhere. The place where the rat is sniffing around now. It sticks its nose inside and finds that the smells are even stronger. You can imagine what happens next. The man can do nothing but lie there helplessly, overcome by disease and exhaustion as the creatures start to consume him from the inside out. He lives for another 5 days before finally feeling the sweet embrace of death. Human beings are pretty damn good at...
Can you imagine that kind of torture?
Who came up with this? Who was like, yeah, fucking... Also, they're doing this on a lake. Fresh water in the Persian desert. People drink that water.
I guess they're not only drinking just the water, are they?
People probably fish that...
Yes, it's a severe
oversight.
Ecological problem.
Sadistic ways of killing each other, aren't we? We've always been, but sometimes execution just doesn't go far enough. At a certain point, death becomes a mercy. Therefore, the most gruesome punishments in history have to be the ones that make sure to delay that person's death and then suspend them in agony for as long as possible. What you've just learned about is scaphism, a practice born out of Persia in the 5th century BC. It's hard to imagine a worse way to go, but don't worry, there are all kinds of gruesome and disgusting punishments for us to unpack together. There are no surprises here, but this definitely isn't the last time that rats feature on the list, as well as certain things being put in certain holes that shouldn't normally go there. And make sure to hold on for the final one. It's particularly creative. Next up, we
is that a blood eagle?
A household name.
Yeah.
In the world of
that looks like a blood eagle.
Methods, flaying, also known as skinning alive. This practice has been around for just about forever. It's stuck because there's just something about it that makes your skin crawl. Literally, humans had gotten pretty good at skinning things way back in the earliest years of our existence, when we first started to use sharp rocks to cut animal hides away from their bodies. As our tools improved and our experience grew, we realized that not only is there a bit of an art to skinning things, but that sometimes those things could be other humans that we don't like very much. And the human can be kept alive while you do it.
They really could have just made the Boltons from Game of Thrones on this.
They even had a god, Shipetotec,
That's true.
who was himself flayed. Shipetotec was always depicted as walking around with bright red skin, or rather no skin at all, and just bright red flesh exposed to the world. He was the god of a lot of things: life, death, rebirth, agriculture, vegetation, the east, spring, goldsmiths, silversmiths, liberation, deadly warfare, the seasons, and the earth in general. It's a pretty broad job description. As such, if you wanted to please him and be blessed in one of those areas, then what better way to offer him a sacrifice than by flaying a person? When European explorers first discovered the Aztecs, they discovered all of these extraordinarily graphic stories about
the god of the east. I need to flay him.
Gruesome rituals. Historians have believed that these accounts were all greatly exaggerated, but archaeological evidence has been uncovered in the last 10 years that there's probably quite a bit of truth to the stories after all. Flaying a person has historically been viewed as a meticulous process, akin to wrapping a present neatly. Instead of laboriously removing bits one by one, cultures across time have sought to accomplish it swiftly and cleanly. Traditionally, a sharp knife and patience were the essential tools. A careful initial incision, typically starting at the head or sometimes elsewhere, served as a starting point. The goal was to delicately navigate between the layers of skin, aiming to reach a depth that ensured thoroughness while leaving the underlying tissue undisturbed. Once the delicate task began, the layers were gradually peeled away. However, often an overlooked aspect is dealing with the intricate network of nerves within the skin. These nerves, akin to the roots of a tree, intertwine throughout the layers, contributing to our detailed sense of touch. Cutting through these dense nerve bundles adds an excruciating level of pain to the process. Historically, certain cultures, such as the Aztecs, employed methods to facilitate skin removal. Boiling water was utilized to scald the skin, causing it to separate more easily from the body, akin to how roasting a chicken loosens its skin. Yet perhaps the most distressing aspect of flaying is the realization that the skin lacks major blood vessels. While there are small capillaries and minor veins, they're insufficient to cause rapid blood loss. Consequently, individuals subjected to this ordeal could endure prolonged agony without succumbing to bleeding out, though shock or stress-induced complications might eventually lead to demise, making their experience truly harrowing. Best not to think about what...
Yeah, I think shock was usually the end result.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think being flayed alive is a good excuse to go into shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, also, just to highlight too, the Aztecs did this to a lot of the tribes around them. They weren't doing this primarily to their own people. Sometimes they believe that using their own people was better, like a more worthy sacrifice. But that's also partially the reason the Spanish were so successful in Mexico. It's like all these other tribes are like, they are killing us. Can you make them stop?
Yeah. I can imagine. I cannot imagine
That.
this.
But it's a good motivator to... you can see why the Aztecs didn't make a lot of friends.
Probably why they faded out of the history books as quick as what they did.
Yeah.
To rub salt onto your wounds, too. Next up, we're heading to Old London Town, with one of Britain's most disgusting forms of punishment in the country's punishment haven, the Tower of London. Housed in the dingy cellars and basements beneath the tower was one of the most feared dungeons, one that would strike fear into the hearts of criminals across England's capital, the Rat Dungeon. Told you there'd be more rats on the list. Prisoners would be dragged down flights of stairs into a stinking dungeon that was totally dark. They'd be shackled down there, left alone as the last light from the guards' burning torches steadily disappeared back up the winding staircase. Then there was nothing left for the prisoner to do but wait in the darkness. You see, this dungeon was built alongside
that was a pretty common torture tactic,
which has never been known to be the cleanest water in the world. Right up until only a few centuries ago, Londoners would throw all their sewage into the Thames, poisoning it and making it a hotbed for rodents and disease. The Rat Dungeon wouldn't be so bad when the river level was low. You would just be lying there on the rocky floor, shackled in total darkness, shivering with cold and terror. Not that bad, right? Well, when the water levels rise, the Thames water starts to fill the dungeon. But it's not usually up to the level of drowning the person shackled there. It might not even reach their feet. Again, not so bad. What was bad, however, were the rats. Millions of rats lived along the banks of the Thames, burrowing their way into the higher parts of the silt, dirt, and litter. That was fine for them when the water level was low, but whenever it started to rise, their burrows would flood, forcing them to find the nearest patch of dry land before they drowned. For thousands upon thousands of rats, this was the Rat Dungeon. Sitting alone in total darkness, you would not see them coming. You'd hear them, though. Hundreds of little disease-ridden bodies scampering over each other, squeaking with fear and hunger. Then you'd feel them, brushing past you on their way to higher ground before stopping to have a sniff. You've been down here quite a while now. You're starting to stink. It must smell good to a rat. One or two of them could take a tentative bite, then more and more until you're being nipped all over. In the dark, you can't see where they are. You can just feel them climbing all over you, sinking their teeth into your flesh. One rat won't kill you. Instead, you just have to lie here and wait for hypothermia, disease, or dehydration to take you. The Thames will rise high enough to drown you in sewage water, if you're lucky. Let's take a break from rats, for now, and visit another favorite from human history.
going from rats.
I have an idea what that is.
The Pair of Anguish.
Oh, boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think of this video so far. It's very interesting. The first one was the worst one so far.
Imagine being one of those guards. That job's gotta suck.
Yeah.
Like fishing that guy back up.
Every day.
Until he's dead, yeah.
Yeah.
With the Pair of Anguish. An internet favorite from recent years, it's hard to find many detailed and reliable accounts of this device being used on victims. However, we do have a number of them sitting in museums, and when you find out exactly how they work, you'll struggle to imagine that they were used for anything other than torture. The Pair of Anguish is pear-shaped. Duh. It's made of metal and has a small key at the thin end of the pear. You turn the key, and the thicker end of the pear splits open into 3 or 4 lobes. The more you turn the key, the farther and farther apart those lobes grow. Some accounts
Do we want to know where that goes?
being used in Paris after the Renaissance, which feels fitting. A pear made of ornate mechanical parts being used as a torture device feels right in line with Renaissance Europe. Some accounts talk about the pear being inserted into the victim's mouth and gradually opened, stretching wider and wider until bones start popping out of joints and cheeks start tearing. There are a lot of other torture methods that would have caused more pain across the whole body, but the psychological aspect of the Pair of Anguish easily makes it one of the most horrifying punishments in human history. Brace yourself, because the next one,
I'm glad it was in the mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it involves rats. There are all kinds of creative ways that people have used rats over the years to torture their victims. The rat dungeon and scaphism are fairly indirect compared to some methods. In India, victims would be forced to wear baggy pants tied up tightly around their waist and ankles. Starving rats would then be tipped into their pants, filling them with writhing, aggressive vermin. The victim would jump around in fear, only agitating the rats more. They would bite and
I know it's
claw
not
any
funny,
flesh
come
they
on.
could find.
The animation is
victims'
funny.
genitals. But it gets worse. In medieval Germany, executioners enjoyed filling up a bucket with rats and placing it with the open side on the person's abdomen, trapping the rats against their flesh. Then they'd take hot coals from the fire and heap them on top of that metal bucket until the rats would start to panic. Driven into a frenzy by the extreme heat, the rats would try to get out any way they could. They couldn't escape through the walls of the metal bucket, so their best option was to go down to the soft flesh beneath them. This leads us to our final disgusting punishment for our world tour of gross. This method popped back into public consciousness in 2019 in the film Midsummer, and we're not talking about flaying again. That film drew heavily from pagan and Norse traditions in Scandinavia. They took one method of punishment straight from the Vikings themselves.
Do we know what the last one is?
I have a feeling I know what the last one is. I didn't even watch Midsummer.
This one is probably one of the most interesting and, at least for me, one of the most confounding ways of torturing people. Like just the way they do it.
It's a very intimate affair.
Very brutal, too. Ladies and gentlemen, if you made it this far into the video, all we ask for is a simple like, a subscribe. You don't even have to leave a comment if you don't want to. But tickle that little bell. That way you know when we're uploading. Our upload schedule is pretty consistent. But if you don't tickle Matt's bell, he won't know that you're here. All right.
In history, there have been some pretty brutal regimes, but few have come close to the sheer savagery of the Vikings. Known for raiding towns full of innocent people, where they would plunder, murder, and commit all kinds of horrific acts against men, women, and children. The Vikings had real, first-hand experience with the darkest acts that one human could perform on another. It was born out of this bloodbath of a people group that we find our final torture and execution method of the video, the Blood Eagle. We learn about this method of execution from late skaldic poetry. It was a kind of special ritual reserved only for specific victims and was incredibly technical to pull off effectively while keeping the victim alive. Harder even than flaying someone from head to toe. It required extreme precision from the executioner to inflict the maximum amount of pain and psychological trauma possible to to keep the victim alive for as long as possible. The blood eagle gets its name from the victim having been touched by an eagle. The victim would be forced to lie down on their front, most likely tied down tightly. A sharp blade would slice open the skin on their back, which would then be pulled back to reveal their spinal cord and the back of their ribs. Cutting carefully along the places where the bones joined, the executioner would separate the ribs from the spine one by one. The ribs would then be wrenched away from the spine, creating large gaps in the victim's back and giving the executioner access to their internal organs. Their lungs were the target. The executioner would reach in and pull the lungs up and out of the holes in their back, stretching them out and suspending them out of the victim's back like a pair of bloody wings, hence the name Blood Eagle. With any luck, the victim would still be alive at this point, and they'd be forced to endure their lungs being squeezed and stretched and pulled out of position as they would lie there suffocating and bleeding out at the same time, waiting for whichever one would come first. Which do you think was the worst? Out of all these disgusting punishments, which would you be?
So, they did highlight a very important fact about the Blood Eagle, that it is not a common punishment. Like one of the most famous accounts of a blood eagle being performed was against King Aela of Northumbria. The sons of Ragnar, in the saga of Ragnar, I'm telling you, had reportedly performed the blood eagle on him because they were so upset with how Ragnar died. It's also a pretty common Scandinavian pagan tradition that in execution, you can still achieve Valhalla in an execution. You are still worthy if you don't scream out, cry, fight, or whatever like that, if you take your death in stride. So beheading was a kind execution. Hanging was a kind execution. Odin himself hung himself from the tree, so it's kind of holy. But the Blood Eagle and burning at the stake too is those are personal. You don't want that man to go to Valhalla. You are denying him the hall. It has to be a savage offense for a group to decide that a Blood Eagle is worth doing.
I think there were only, 2 confirmed documented Blood Eagles done?
Mm-hmm. We have to say that, unfortunately, the Scandinavians didn't write a lot of their history down, so there could have been plenty more.
Yeah. As detailed and as intricate as it is, I'm sure it was saved for special occasions.
Like I said, it's intimate.
Yeah.
You don't do it to a man unless he's wronged you horribly. And the sons of Ragnar's execution in a pit of vipers was worth a Blood Eagle. It was worth the largest pagan invasion of a Christian land since the fall of Rome.
There you have it, folks. A little bit of history for you. How'd you guys like that one? It was a little bit different, a little bit out there. Kind of the way the channel's going. We're going to be a little bit out there. We're going to be a little bit different. Hope y'all enjoy the content.
Yeah.
If you do, give us a follow on social media. We'll be a little more interactive on there. We'll be dropping a little more. Until then, don't forget Tickle Matt's bell.
Okay.
I think we're going to make some merch with that.
Don't.
No?
I don't want to wear a shirt that says Tickle My Bell. That sounds like a bad idea.
It's all about branding, right?
Oh, God.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.